It's the week ending Saturday, the 12th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped, brought to you by Barclays Corporate Banking. In the past 7 days, we've seen President Trump walking out of government shutdown talks, Bohemian Rhapsody winning big at the Golden Globes, and Parliament rebelling against the British government for the second time in the ongoing Brexit debates. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team are Kari Wilkin and Holden Frith. And from the Week Junior, we welcome back Felicity Capon. And starting the show this week is Kari. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
I think this is the week we ask, are we sleepwalking towards the next big health crisis?
The more consistent our wake-up time is, the more our circadian rhythm is in sync. It makes it easier to wake up, but it also makes it easier to fall asleep.
So you wake up at 5 a.m. one day. You want to be consistent with where you wake up.
Exactly. And I know that kind of stinks because the weekends, people have a tendency to really want to sleep in. Only sleep in about a half an hour on the weekends. Otherwise, your whole circadian clock shifts, and you get what's called social jet lag. So if you stay up late on Friday, sleep in on Saturday, guess what happens on Sunday night?
That was Dr. Michael Breus, a.k.a. the Sleep Doctor, speaking on NBC's Today Show on Monday. Kari, you want to talk about sleep? You look like you've had some. I'm going to start with a compliment.
This is one reason I think I've noticed lots of sleep stories this week, and I think it's possibly because I'm going through a bout of insomnia. But I do think this is topical. And one story that particularly caught my eye was in The Guardian about how British school children are to be offered newly developed sleep lessons, which are aimed at 7 to 16-year-olds, and basically focusing on strategies for getting to sleep and raising awareness about how their sleep needs change as they get older. And this is in response to growing concern about children not getting enough sleep. NHS data shows that in the past 5 years, the number of admissions of under 17s with a primary diagnosis of sleep disorder has increased by almost 50%. And I think our society generally is just obsessed with sleep. I know I certainly am at the moment.
It's interesting. I'm now going to measure you all against, when it comes to your stories, whether your interest in them reflects your personal lives. But the children not sleeping thing, that seems most commonly to be attributed these days to smartphone use, social media use. Is that really, when all's said and done, what this is?
No, I don't think it is. I think that's one factor, but I think there's a variety of things going on here. Experts are blaming higher obesity levels for a start, and it becomes a vicious cycle because lack of sleep has been linked to weight gain as well as many other health problems, and also the mental health crisis among young people. But yes, definitely there's new official health guidelines have advised against screen time for the hour before bed. In fact, that was found to be the only provable harmful effect of screen time, was doing it before bed, because the blue light represses melatonin production, which then means people can't sleep. But I don't think this is just limited to children, although obviously sleep is particularly important for kids. A recent paper in the British Medical Journal suggested that sleep had a greater impact on an adolescent's mental well-being than bullying, physical activity and screen time. But I think this is a problem across the board for people of all ages.
Holden, do you get your 40 winks?
I tend to go through periods where I sleep really well, and then my sleep pattern will just be disrupted for a while, and there's not necessarily anything that I can put that down to. I think I think the idea of having sleep lessons is good if it can raise awareness of things you can do to help yourself sleep. Where I think it could become problematic is if it ends up putting more pressure on people, because the one thing that's bound to keep me awake is if I'm lying there thinking I've really got to get to sleep.
And is it also, I welcome this as the mother of a 9-year-old who does not sleep well at all.
Could that 9-year-old be part of the reason that you're not sleeping well at all?
This is it, you found it.
Yeah, there you are. I've saved you money on going to see the sleep doctor.
Wow. So, I welcome it in that sense. But on the other hand, isn't it just a bit warped that we need to be taught to do something as natural and innate as sleeping?
Well, fortunately, we have a children's journalist in the room. Felicity, do you think it's good for children to be taught about how to sleep at school? And we've talked before on the show about other things that could be taught at school that aren't, sex and relationship education, drugs, anti-terrorism. Is this the most important thing?
I don't think it should replace maths or science, if that's what you mean. I think it's positive that we're actually taking it seriously now, and I think it is if we are sort of seeing a crisis of sleep, particularly among children in the same way as mental health or obesity, then I think it is a good thing that adults are addressing that and trying to find ways of solving it. And I think it is really positive that you are seeing more and more headlines about how much of a health issue it is. I think we need to get away from this idea that it's some sort of privileged wellness goop fad, and it actually is something that genuinely does have repercussions for all our lives. So I think it's positive in that sense. I agree with Holden in that all these headlines about how you need all this sleep and how your life will be adversely affected if you don't get it can just be part of the problem, and that surely that's just going to make you feel more anxious and you're going to get less sleep. But I think overall it is a positive thing that we're now seeing it as the serious crisis that it is.
I saw some sleep researchers saying they've started to identify what they call orthosomnia, which is sleeplessness caused by an obsession with not getting enough sleep. And it's essentially people using these sleep tracking apps that say, you've only got 6.5 hours sleep and only 3 hours of that was quality sleep, and you need to be doing this. And so and some of them actually kind of start like making an alarm sound to tell you when you should be in bed. And I think that kind of pressure, if you imagine, especially children at school when they're under pressure for all sorts of reasons, if you're adding an extra layer of pressure onto them they'll start to get performance anxiety about sleep as well as everything else.
Yeah, and perhaps, Corey, it doesn't therefore address the root cause. I mean, I'm familiar with this sort of conversation because I used to host a late night, early morning, as in through the night radio phone in. And obviously the topic of sleeplessness is a big one at that time. So, probably once every couple of months at 2 a.m. we'd do a phone in about, do you have trouble sleeping? Because clearly the answer for a lot of the listeners was yes. But the root cause of it was nothing to do with blue screens or the time that they go to bed and how they focus. It was to do with all the other things we know about impacting on people's lives. They had issues with their benefits. They had mental health problems. They were under pressure at work. These are the things that keep you awake at night. And actually, that's just the body's natural reaction to things, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, as you say, does tie into just, increasing anxiety generally. I think Holden also makes a very good point that we've all become obsessed with sleep. Try getting through the day without someone telling you they're tired. Try getting through the day without me telling you I'm tired. But there is also this growing industry in sleep aids. This week at the CES Tech Trade Show in Las Vegas, there have been all sorts of weird and wonderful gadgets that are meant to help you sleep being unveiled. And it's a new major trend. One that caught my eye, and I still don't really entirely understand how it works. It's a high-tech headband called Ergonite, which basically you wear for 3 20-minute waking sessions each week, and the band takes an EEG of your brain and then presents the data. Sorry, I'm just reading what I've read because I don't understand it. And then presents the data on a screen in such a way that it helps you to train your brain waves to act in a certain way that then promotes better sleep. And it's a technique known as visual neurofeedback. So basically it trains your brain into developing brainwave patterns for healthier sleep. And the makers claim that tests have proven that it can work within as little as 3 months.
I think there's something quite nefarious about this. So I think the arrival of any epidemic is going to bring commercial opportunities, and some of them are a good thing, and some of them I think are a bit more worrying, especially in the world of sleep pills and actually medicines that supposedly help you get to sleep. And I think there are a lot of really dodgy side effects to them. So I think that's quite worrying.
Well, also, increasing number of kids each year are being prescribed melatonin, which helps them sleep. And in fact, one of my daughters is on it because it's the only way she can sleep. And we had a real debate about whether to give it to her. It hasn't actually been linked to health problems, but it's still very early days, so no one's entirely sure. But we just reached the point she couldn't sleep and she was a wreck, and it has made a huge difference. But the specialist was saying at the hospital was saying to us that, every week he sees more and more kids coming in needing these sort of treatments. But as you said, are we perhaps treating the symptom rather than the cause?
And actually, what about the social media stuff and smartphone use? What is your parental rule with your daughter on that?
They're not allowed any screen time for at least an hour before bed.
And has that made a difference?
I mean, we've been enforcing it for so long that it's kind of almost difficult to tell now. I think it certainly helps them wind down, if nothing else.
Because grown-ups tend not to follow the advice that they insist that their own children do, don't they? That's the thing. We all say, don't take your smartphone to bed. And then the first thing we do when we get up in the morning, reach for our phone. It's right there on our bedside table.
So I would try to avoid using my phone at all before bed. I don't always follow that rule, but the one I do follow is not checking email before bed, because the one thing that's guaranteed to prevent me sleeping
is
if you open an email
from Kari saying, I can't sleep.
Yeah. But I think there is just that, the other factor that's often talked about is the banishing of dusk, essentially, the fact that we have electric lights and bright lights, and we don't have that kind of natural, gradual winding down to the end of the day.
I think also possibly another thing we look at is to encourage. There's also a story this week about how Japanese firms are offering workers incentives to get more sleep, such as they can get cafeteria food vouchers if they're proven via an app monitor to have got a certain amount of sleep each night.
Ugh.
And they're also setting up. It's a bit
So
creepy,
Black Mirror
isn't it?
weird, isn't it?
But they're also
That's
setting up
pressure.
sleeping rooms at work and encouraging employees not to do overtime. And in fact, what really impressed me was the Japanese Health Ministry actually recommends that all working age people take a daily afternoon nap of up to 30 minutes.
Okay, let's finish with this topic on that. Felicity, you manage people in this building. How would you feel if they said, right, I need to take a nap. I'm going off for an hour. I'm going to sleep.
I think it is positive to think about ways that you can help to get more out of your workers. I mean, the people who work for me, they get an hour lunch break if they wanted to go and cull under the desk and sleep.
They've had
for
their
an
lunch
hour.
break.
I'd be okay with
They've
that.
had their lunch. They say, I'm going to be more productive if I sleep now. Just half an hour. Give me a nap. Yeah, I'm going to go in. I'd like us to build a special sofa so I can have a nap for half an hour.
It wouldn't bother me if they took half an hour nap and you had that
One day?
Yeah, not on deadline day. Like, on deadline day, you've got to be focused and
But the
not
point
sleeping.
is, it sort of doesn't seem relevant whether it's provable that you're more productive as a result of napping. There is, Holden, isn't there, an institutional bias in this country against the idea. It feels like slacking. Even if someone can say, look, I've done more because I slept for half an hour.
Yeah, it does. And I'm not personally someone who can nap, so I think I'm slightly more suspicious of people who can. And no, I mean, in a
be allowed to go for a nap this afternoon.
Clearly, Ollie's angling for a nap in the ad breaks.
Who's to say I don't? Okay, Holden, you are up next after this. Holden, your time has come. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Here's why Californians may be losing their power.
If PG&E declares bankruptcy, it is PG&E essentially saying that they care more about saving the behinds of the executives than they do about compensating all the people they've victimized. So it sends a message that PG&E is not willing to do the right thing and compensate all of these people it's harmed.
That was attorney Amanda Riddle speaking to KBCW on the recent woes of energy firm PG&E. Holden, household name, literally, in the United States, but maybe not here. Who are PG&E?
No, they used to be known as Pacific Gas and Electric, which gives more of a clue of what they do. They're California's biggest power company. They were once the state monopoly. They were privatised, I think, about 15 years or so ago. And they are no stranger to mishaps of various sorts. They've been bankrupt once before. Uh-huh. They were also the villain of the film Erin Brockovich, which was based on the true story of the toxic waste they were releasing into groundwater supplies in California in the early 1990s. Now, they're facing even bigger compensation claims than the hundreds of $1 millions they had to pay out after that case. This time it's expected it could run into the billions, and that could lead to their breakup or bankruptcy.
Why? What might they have done?
You may remember there were some big wildfires in California last year and again this year. The two that happened last year, one of which ended up with 86 people dead, are currently under investigation, and PG&E are the prime suspects as being the owners of the equipment that caused the fire. This is a slightly contentious case because they may actually not have done anything wrong. It may just be that storms brought these power lines down onto very dry land, and that caused the fire. And under Californian law, if it's their equipment, they then have to pay the compensation that's due.
Wow. So compensation on 85 families, and that's just the fatalities.
Yep, and then all the land owners too. Goldman Sachs said it could run to $29 billion in total. They have been accused of safety breaches in other cases, and so there's various other liability claims against them, and they are still under investigation. But in this case, so far, there's been no proof that they did anything wrong, but the liability still stands.
Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about, I guess, the energy market internationally in just a minute and what this means for all the big energy companies. But specifically regarding cables and wildfires, and Felicity, if there is a provable link, if it was their fault, what can be done to stop that happening again?
Well, I think this is why it's so murky. I think the sheer scale of land that PG&E kind of looks after, part of the reason that all these charges are being brought is because of trees falling onto power lines. That's a big cause for these claims. And I think they're sort of saying in their defence it would be insane for them to have to go around and check and cut back every single tree or branch falling onto a cable. So it's to do with...
That would mean literally clearing trees around every pylon.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's why there's a lot of talk about houses, particularly in California, need to rely more on batteries, so that in the case that the weather gets really, really extreme, the companies can turn off the power and these households can move on to batteries. But I think it's an interesting one in what it says more widely about global climate change. I mean, the wildfires last year were certainly very severe, but they're not an aberration. I think they are looking to become the new norm. And I think PG&E is sort of saying in their defence that wildfires are only going to get worse as a result of climate change, and really how much responsibility can they take for that?
Yeah, so I suppose the argument, Kari, is not that PG&E may or may not have caused the wildfire. The argument is you cause any fire in California now and it goes up very quickly, and that's not their fault.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, climate change makes the consequences of small errors much greater. So they're kind of reaching the stage it's where you do wonder how these utility firms are going to be able to turn any sort of profit if they're held accountable for any kind of fire. And in fact, there are some critics are claiming that they're basically threatening to declare bankruptcy in order to get better liabilities protection from the California law. There's a new California bill that's reportedly in the works to help provide PG&E with relief. So lawmakers recognise that it's at a crisis point for everyone involved.
OK, so that's what it means for PG&E. What does it mean for everyone else? Energy companies around the world, people living in California, us here in the UK?
That's really the reason I picked this story this week, is that this does seem to be part of a broader trend of making companies and governments too responsible for the cost of their activities in a much broader sense. So there was the British government last month talked about making packaging manufacturers responsible for the cost of recycling what they produce. We've talked before about calls to make the tobacco industry responsible for the environmental cost of their product. And it tends to be the environmental costs that are being added into to the burden that ends up on consumers as well as the companies who supply them. And I think we're probably going to see a lot more of these sorts of bankruptcies, as it turns out that companies have been working on business models that just they can't bear the costs that are being added onto them. And
that's a problem for the energy market all over the world, because at the moment it's not in the best state, is it, Kari? We've seen a lot of companies, energy companies, small ones in the UK, go bust. I mean, even one this week, I think. Yeah,
I mean, when you actually start reading up on the energy market in the UK, you realise just what a wild west and what a state of chaos it is out there at the moment. Last year alone, 7 energy firms, 7 fairly decent-sized energy firms went bust, and they were all new challengers to the market. And challenger energy providers are struggling to cope with the pressure of rising wholesale costs, as are all energy providers. But they're also the ones who've really been hit by the government's renewable obligation schemes, whereby suppliers who don't source a set proportion of electricity from renewable sources have to pay into a buyout fund administered by Ofgem, the regulator. And according to Ofgem, there was a shortfall of almost 59 million in renewable subsidies from these new challenger firms who missed the October deadline last year alone. So although the government is obviously trying to tackle global warming, it's actually hitting the small suppliers who are coming in and trying to challenge the big six, but even as the government also introduces measures to target the big six.
And since Jamie Simpson isn't here, I'm going to channel him internally and say, Felicity, that's because privatisation won't work, isn't it? It's because this whole concept of a challenger marketplace and choosing your provider, it's nonsense anyway in terms of the actual product that comes to your house, as we've explored on this show before, because there's a national grid. So that comes from all of the companies working together. And secondly, if you have too many challenges, they clearly are unable to cope in this environment anyway, because there's too much work to be done.
I think so, but I think it's also to do with the consumer versus the big companies and kind of how much rights and how much understanding they have of the situation. I think what particularly struck me about California is the crazy amounts of lobbying that's going on. So what PG&E want is a California law that would allow them to pass on their costs to customers in the form of higher electricity rates. And after earlier lobbying efforts, legislators have actually already voted to protect the companies from having to bear the cost of 2017 fires. And it's looking like the same that will happen again for 2018. And I think that's really, really worrying. So in the first 9 months of 2018, the 3 investor-owned utilities in California collectively gave $5 million to the campaigns of state lawmakers. So that's really the sort of getting into bed between the lawmakers and the big energy firms, I think, is something to watch.
And they're clearly demanding bang for their buck. Last month, PG&E asked the state energy regulators to authorise rate increases of 12% next year, which is pretty astronomical.
So is this part of the debate in the US, Holden? Are people saying if it hadn't been privatised, we'd be able to deal with this in a more efficient manner?
I'm not sure if they're saying exactly that. There certainly have been calls for it to go back into public ownership, but that's more a case of attempting to secure those compensation payments, because the risk is of it going, if it goes bankrupt, then those compensation payments are likely to be cut. There are advantages in this area to having small private companies that can try different approaches to the energy market. So I'd say privatisation has certainly created a lot more small companies that are less stable than some of the bigger names we know, and that has fed into a lot of the bankruptcies we've seen here. But it's also a lot of the smaller, greener companies that we've seen sprouting up around the UK probably wouldn't have been able to get into that market if we'd just had British Gas and Eastern Electricity to deal with. You know, part of the way capitalism is meant to work is that companies with business models that don't work go out of business, and that creates space for newer, and in this particular case, greener business models to come through.
It's going to get tougher for those newcomers because Ofgem is just about to introduce tougher licensing rules and tests to make it harder for new challengers to enter the market in a bid to protect consumers from poor customer service and from being hit by the lack of financial resilience of these firms. So it's a real quandary as in how to tackle this issue.
And we've talked as well on the show before about, you know, the future of solar-powered roof tiles and, you know, big batteries at home being manufactured by people like Tesla. It doesn't really seem to be happening in the real world, does it? I mean, if you actually try and buy one of these things, it's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, how far away are we from cutting our dependencies as renters and homeowners from basically a handful of energy companies?
We're a very long way from that here. I think California is actually much closer to that. And the number of homes with batteries, number of homes with solar sources of power is much higher. But this clearly shows even they have got a way to go before that's across the board.
And is Julia Roberts in talks for the movie? I don't know what she's up to recently. I'd be interested to see. All right, one last story to come after this. And so finally this week, Felicity, what do you think this week will be remembered for?
'Tis the season to get divorced, hooray! But at what cost?
He built the world's biggest internet retailer. She is an award-winning novelist, and their partnership predates their professional achievements. But after 25 years, Jeff and Mackenzie Bezos are to part. And how do the Amazon founder and his wife announce their divorce plans? Online, of course. After a long period of loving exploration and trial separation, said a statement released on Twitter, we have decided to divorce and continue our shared lives as friends. We would do it all again, they say. And though the labels might be different, we remain a family and we remain cherished friends.
That was ITV's Geraint Vincent reporting this week on the news that Jeff Bezos and his wife are getting a divorce. But Felicity, you're not just here to talk about the world's richest man getting a separation, but everybody.
No, I'm here to talk about a story that was in the Financial Times this week. London's reputation for being the divorce capital of the world because of the generous settlements awarded could be coming to an end, it reports. Judges are increasingly moving to limit a type of financial award which has been called the meal ticket for life. They're looking to place time limits on lifelong post-divorce maintenance payments and now expect the financially weaker spouse to eventually go out to work, get a job and support themselves.
Interesting, okay, because the argument presumably hasn't changed, which is essentially if we'd continued to be married, then I'd continue to expect this financial projection. So why is the logic change that you're entitled to that?
I think it's to do with shifting norms and expectations about marriage and what the different partners in a marriage and in the marriage bring to that relationship. So I think it's a very interesting insight into sort of societal shifts. The situation currently is that English law says wealth should be split equally in the event of a divorce, which is why it is so popular, particularly amongst international clients. So even if one half of the union is the main breadwinner, and in most of the cases it is the man, there's still likely to be a 50-50 split to take into account and to make sure that the financially weaker partner still can go forward and be independent.
But there are other mitigating things, aren't there? Like, for example, if they've got children, then one person, it's easier for them to say, well, I gave up my career to look after the kids.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. And I think that's why this case is so interesting, because I think a lot of people would argue that, especially with women, if they have given up their career to look after children, to raise a family, and they've, as a result, their career and their salary and all that sort of thing isn't at the point where it should be. That has to be taken into consideration. And also you might be at a point where your skill set is now 20 years behind what it could have been had you not been in that marriage. So that needs to be accounted for.
This change maybe has been a long time coming, though, Kari, in terms of the big tabloid stories where you see a celebrity, a rock star or something, who gets a divorce, and you think, OK, all the arguments are the same, the logic's the same, the spouse should be entitled to 50%, they stayed at home to look after the kids, but this guy's worth, like in the case of Jeff Bezos, so many billions that you just think, are they really entitled to that? Like, that's what that person earned. A lot of people just instinctively feel that there's an incentive to get divorced.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one factor, as in you can argue, well, if the woman stayed at home, as was certainly been typical in the past, then you could argue that she enabled that career and she enabled him to make that money. So therefore, yes, it's effectively a partnership, the same as you'd have a partnership in a business. I think one of the really contentious issues and what's made English law quite an oddity is the fact that you could get lifelong monthly maintenance payments, and it's at what point do you draw the line? And there's been two recent cases in London where judges have essentially overturned appeals from women in both cases to continue getting maintenance payments throughout their lives. One wife had asked for her husband to increase his the monthly payments after she made bad property investments following their divorce, and the judge ruled that no, that's her responsibility because that was post-divorce life. And I think that raises all sorts of very interesting issues. I didn't realise until I read this article that most other countries, including Scotland, these post-divorce payouts are limited to 3 years after the divorce, at which point you're on your own.
I thought you were going to say 20 or something.
No, Scotland, Norway and Greece, it's limited to 3 years. It's 8 years in France. So we're actually... I hadn't realised, but England is quite odd in this sort of approach to you are tied in for life.
And Holden, is that an anomaly that needs correcting then?
I think it might be, actually. I think the lifetime sort of maintenance of standard of living maybe did make more sense when the expectation was that women essentially gave up their career as soon as they got married, and that men could reasonably expect to have a job for life and a job that would give them a reliable standard of living and probably a slightly increasing standard of living as time goes by. Now I think it's much more likely that both spouses will work for most of their married lives, and also that both will change their jobs several times, may change their careers, may live in different cities, may have a completely different approach to how they prioritise earning against other parts of life. And so I think to expect that at the point of divorce you can set a standard of living and then maintain that for the rest of a person's life is probably an outdated idea.
And it's not just Jeff Bezos, and it's not just the English law courts. You have a third divorce story to bring into the fold, Felicity, regarding Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
This
yes.
is the new divorce portion of the show. What else has happened in divorce news?
In Saudi Arabia? Well, I think that in Saudi Arabia there has been a change in their extremely strict laws that women now will be notified by text if they are being divorced by their husbands. Up until now, there was no requirement for them to be notified at all, which obviously put them at an extreme disadvantage in terms of scrabbling to defend themselves and to get any kind of compensation or anything like that. So, I mean, yeah, it's...
But it's not even a text, I mean, it's ridiculous to quantify this, but it's not even a text saying you're being notified that your husband intends to divorce you. It's still the text saying you are now divorced. It's just having the courtesy to tell you that fact.
I wonder if it has an emoji at the end.
You also get access to related legal documents, so they are giving women more power in that sense. Whether they're getting the power to actually challenge those legal rulings is another matter.
OK, I mean, Saudi Arabia, again, bit of an anomalous country, isn't it? But I suppose it shows that this season of the year, actually, I mean, this is the week unwrapped. It's awful, isn't it? But as you said in your introduction, kind of is the season to get divorced. People get through the holiday periods and they realise that maybe things aren't working out. This is the peak time, isn't it?
It was Divorce Day on Monday, which is the first working Monday of January, is recognised as the day that divorce inquiries peak. So happy Divorce Day.
And even wasn't there a headline even on Christmas Day? There were a record number of people. And
I think it was 18 people filed for divorce on
Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which I totally get. Christmas is so stressful. You just want to murder everyone, don't you? No, just me? All society?
No, yeah.
And with that, I'm going to end our relationship with this edition of The Week Unwrapped. It's an amicable split, as ever, explored in love. My thanks to Holden Frith, Kari Wilkin and Felicity Capon, and to our sponsor, Barclays Corporate Banking. Their industry experts can help your business. Find out more about that at barclayscorporate.com/theweek. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast to get new episodes as soon as they're available. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice and then hit subscribe. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.